The best part about AEW Worlds End last night was the world actually ended well before midnight. That's the first AEW pay-per-view I can remember that ended at 11:30. And I'm not saying that it was a bad show and I couldn't wait for it to be over, but I genuinely believe it is better for the shows not to drag on for that long. It would be one thing if it happened a couple of times out of the year, for a really loaded card on a major show. But to do that every single month, it's just overkill. So they kept it to 8 matches on the main card. I think that was perfect. Not a perfect show by any means, but a good show overall. The best part being all 3 Continental Classic matches, with the final between Kazuchika Okada and Will Ospreay being a Match of the Year candidate. And so was Ospreay's earlier match too, but this was the match of the night. The full review is up on YouTube right now. The main event was a 4-way for the AEW World title. It did not deliver the goods. It was one of the worst AEW pay-per-view main events all year. In a year that had very strong main events, this was easily the worst that I can remember, as Jon Moxley retains the AEW World Championship. No surprise there. The Death Riders got involved and it turned into a giant cluster. No surprise there. And ultimately, it just did not live up to expectations, especially with Hangman and Jay White in there. The Death Rider stuff is just dying on the vine. Okay, they needed to do something different. That's where FTR and Adam Copeland come into the picture. Now, on Dynamite, Dax said that, because they did a pre-taped interview, and Dax said that they would be back. They would be medically cleared on New Year's Day, because Dynamite this week is coming to their hometown. It's coming to Asheville, North Carolina. And it's the Fight for the Fallen episode of Dynamite, so they already said they're going to be back on that show, but they said they would not be coming alone. So they didn't wait until Wednesday to reveal who they were talking about, even though it was clear as day to me that it was Adam Copeland. It's also from Asheville. And sure enough, it was Adam Copeland who they introduced last night. He came out, he speared Jon Moxley, and then he warned Moxley that they were coming for them. They were taking it all. And no sooner did they wipe out the Death Riders at the end of the show than Tony Khan got word to Tony Schiavone that there will be a trios match on Dynamite with Copeland and FTR taking on Moxley, Claudio, and Wheeler Yuta. Now, it's good to get a big name back who can be a thorn in Moxley's side, but it's the first ex-WWE guy to step up to him after Orange Cassidy failed. Darby Allin has failed so far. Now Jay White and Hangman Page have failed. They all have failed to take down Jon Moxley. So we'll see, I guess, if the 50-year-old ex-WWE guy can do what all of them could not do. The story here is Darby Allin. Okay, the story is Will Ospreay. The story even is Kenny Omega, potentially. Now, it's not going to be Omega, but those are the kinds of names that make sense for being the one to take down Jon Moxley at the end of all this. Copeland is a stopgap until they can do Moxley against Darby. I think that's the Revolution match in March. It looks like we're going to get Copeland against Moxley at Grand Slam in Australia. That would be my guess. They still have not been able to articulate a good reason for this Death Rider stuff. Moxley speaks in riddles for the most part. He talks about a new order. He's the king. It's their way or the highway. He's tired of all the silliness and the laziness and the complacency and blah, blah, blah. But when this first started, this looked like it was going in a completely different direction. And I even made the comment a week or two ago. I said, I have convinced myself here that they were intending on introducing Shane McMahon into this storyline. And I think that he got cold feet. He changed his mind and he opted not to come in. And I think that they had to take this in a different direction. I do believe that. Because at the beginning of all this, he was talking like something's happening that's bigger than any of us could even know about. I can't give you all the details, right? Remember what he was telling Darby before they wrestled the Grand Slam in September? Right, this is bigger than you. This is bigger than me. Something big is going on here. I just can't tell you what it is. And in reality here, there's no secret agenda. There is no big reveal. There's no big twist to all this. And if there is, they've waited too long to let us know what it is. It's just fucking boring. The Death Rider stuff sucks. And if I have to see Wheeler Yuta involved in another main event finish on one of these pay-per-views, I'm going to fucking gag. This is New Japan House of Torture levels of bad. So where does Hangman Page go from here? Where does Jay White go from here? Right? They were sacrificed last night for the sake of an Adam Copeland return. On Wednesday, they should make it very clear what is going to be next for those two guys, especially Hangman. Hangman finally got that big win over Swerve at All Out, and now he has nothing to show for it. Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, they had another excellent match, this time in the semifinals of the Continental Classic. I have it just below their Full Gear match, but one of the best opening matches on any pay-per-view that they have ever done. I think it might have even topped MJF against Darby at Full Gear in 2021. Fletcher has been one of the standouts in this tournament. I think he should have won the tournament. That's why he was my pick to win when this thing first started. But beating Will Ospreay in the finals is how it should have been done. And with the rule change that Tony made this year to have the Gold League winner against the Blue League runner-up and the Blue League winner against the Gold League runner-up, that just wasn't going to be possible. You know, people tell me, oh, well, that's how it's done in other sports or the G1. Yes, I'm aware that it happens in other sports that way. It's not that I don't know that. It's not that I'm not aware of that. But in order for that story to have worked, Ospreay and Fletcher would have had to meet in the finals. That's why I was disappointed that they did it that way. But they did it that way because Okada was always going to win this tournament. Right now we see that. He was always going to win this. Ospreay didn't need to win this tournament any more than Okada did. Fletcher is the one who would have benefited the most. And Ricochet, too. I mean, Ricochet would have benefited, but Ricochet was never going to win this either. But it doesn't mean that Fletcher is buried. It doesn't mean that Kyle Fletcher is toast. His push is done. That's it. This is his ceiling. They need to build on this. The look on his face after he lost to Ospreay, okay, you can tell, like, he's not finished with him. They're one win apiece now. There will be a rubber match between the two of them. I like what they've done with Kyle Fletcher up to this point. They need to build off of his performance in this tournament. If they don't, then yes, it is a fail on Tony Khan's part. It's like Powerhouse Hobbs on this show. He had a great match with Takeshita, right? He lost. But it's all about what he does next. It's all about the follow-up. If Tony doesn't have anything lined up for him on TV this week to keep him visible, then this means absolutely nothing, okay? A banger match with Takeshita for the international title that he lost means not a damn thing if Hobbs is relegated to collision duty every 3 weeks. But it's clear that Tony wanted to protect all of his champions before those Tokyo Dome shows this week. You know, Takeshita, he kept his title. And he's going to the Dome to wrestle Shingo. Mercedes, she kept her title, even though she's not defending the TBS title at the Tokyo Dome, right? He still didn't want to beat her, though. Athena, beating Billy Starks and retaining her Ring of Honor Women's title at Final Battle. That still has me completely dumbfounded. But she's heading to Japan as well, so he didn't want to beat her either. So Ospreay moves on to the finals, and Okada moves on to the finals with a win over Ricochet. More people have mentioned Ricochet's name in the last 2 weeks than they have in 6 years working for WWE. He has leaned into the geek gimmick, the geek heel gimmick. It suits him well. It's a hell of a lot more interesting than just babyface Ricochet calling himself one and only when I could find half a dozen different Ricochets on that roster. Okay, if you blindfolded me and you had me play pin the tail on the donkey with all the members of the AEW roster pinned to my wall, I guarantee you I would land on someone who works the same style that Ricochet does. Right? The flashy moves are not enough. What else does he bring to the table? They are trying to add more depth to the character. Fans are throwing rolls of toilet paper at him, and you got people talking like he can't recover from this. Look at what he's been relegated to. They're showering him with Charmin, even though they're leaning into it to make it part of the gimmick. And after what Swerve and Prince Nana did last night, he's going to be working a program with a former AEW World Champion now. Swerve and Ricochet, that should be fun. I'm looking forward to that. I think part of what's going on here is that people don't want to give the gimmick a chance because they don't want to have to admit, if it works, that they were wrong. So they'll continue to shit on it to reinforce the idea that they were right in the first place. I'm giving it a chance because he's at least somewhat interesting now in a way that he wasn't before. Yes, he's not a great promo. We know this already. We've beaten that horse completely dead. There's no pulse left. We know that, but that doesn't mean that this gimmick can't work. But that gave us an Ospreay-Okada final that just rocked the house last night. Match of the night. The first true New Japan performance that we have seen out of Okada since he joined the AEW roster. Right down to that finishing sequence, it was great. It was fantastic. But Okada wins because it was clear to me after Dynamite what they were setting up for, which was for the return of Kenny Omega to come out and confront Okada when the show was over or the match was over. Because looking back on this really should have closed the show. I mean, I know why it didn't, but it should have. But that's exactly what happened. He came down to the ring, did Kenny, to present the Continental title to Okada, and they made sure to get a shot of the All In Texas banner behind them when they did. That's the place where we're going to get Omega versus Okada for the Continental belt. Okada is not dropping that thing until July. Does it need the Continental title? No, it doesn't. Really, it doesn't need any title. But they were not going to beat Okada for it until he got in the ring with Kenny Omega. There were two reasons, really, why Okada won this tournament. Number one, Tony Khan wanted to be able to call him the greatest tournament wrestler of all time, because they wouldn't shut up about it on commentary, okay? He's got 4 G1 victories. This win makes number 5, as far as tournaments go. That, and Tony wanted to do Omega against Okada at Wembley Stadium. Kenny was hurt, he couldn't make the match, and so now he wants to do it at their next big stadium show. Those are the reasons why Okada won this tournament. You could quibble and argue that, well, somebody else should have been in that spot. They could have benefited, of course. I just gave you 2 names who could have benefited from winning this tournament, but that's not what it was about. Tony made his decision. This was always going to be about Okada, and it was always to set this match up, which is still many months away. But we don't even know what Kenny is going to look like this weekend. He hasn't had a match in over a year. He's wrestling his first match this weekend. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here. So holding off on the match until July, I mean, depending on how Kenny looks in the ring, you know what? It might not be such a bad idea to hold off on the match. We'll see how things go for him at the Dome coming up this Sunday. Tony Schiavone, though, you know, when Kenny was leaving, Tony Schiavone on commentary talking about how it's going to be some time before Kenny gets into ring shape to get back in the ring after his surgery was just mind-boggling to me, considering he's wrestling in a week. And they promoted that very fact on Dynamite last week. It's not like it's a big secret where they're not acknowledging it on TV. Apparently, Schiavone doesn't pay attention to his own show. I'm not sure which was dumber, that or Excalibur after MJF pinned Adam Cole, but then got left laying by the Undisputed Kingdom saying that Adam Cole is the real winner. No, he's not, you imbecile. MJF won. You know, the guy who got the pin. One other highlight from the show last night was Mercedes Mone and Chris Statlander for the TBS title. It got off to a slow start and a very quiet start. But by the end of it, it turned into a very good match. It was on par with their first match. It wasn't better than their first match, but it was on the same level. But they did make history, though, because it was the first women's match in the 5 years of AEW, believe it or not, to go past the 20-minute mark. They actually went almost 25 minutes. It was the longest match of the entire night. And it felt like it in the first half. But like I said, it got better. But that's actually really sad. Because I saw some people talking about it, and I almost couldn't believe it at first. And I looked and I said, holy shit. It was the longest match on the show, and it was the longest women's match in AEW history. And but like some people talk about it like, oh, this is such a great thing. No, it's not. That's fucking sad. That with all the talent they have in that division, it took 5 years to get a women's match on this show to hit the 20-minute mark. But you know what? For all the talk about what a bust Mercedes has been for Tony Khan, she was going to come in and she was going to be the change that this division needed. She was going to be a game changer. She's been a part of a lot of lackluster feuds, and the Camille stuff is rightfully on the list of the worst of 2024 because Tony has no idea what he's doing. But you know what? It took Mercedes Mone to finally get the ladies 25 minutes on a fucking pay-per-view. Because you know that she had a say in how much time that match was going to get. She wanted 20 minutes, she got 20 minutes. And if that gets the women longer matches more often, then you know what? You can say that she did bring change to the women's division. That's the sort of change that I think people were talking about. Can they get more eyes on the women? Can they get more real estate on the television shows? Can they get longer matches? They did here. It took a while, but we finally saw it last night because nobody else has been able to squeeze that much time out of Tony Khan before last night. But she is still the TBS champion. She's going to Japan this week with both of her belts. I enjoyed the show. I have my usual gripes with the booking, but it was a good show. If you want the full review, it's up on YouTube right now. Dynamite and Collision this week, they're going to be their first shows that air live on TBS and TNT and also stream live on Max. So that's going to skew the ratings going forward when the numbers get reported because it will not reflect the full audience watching the show. I'm curious what those TBS numbers look like on Wednesdays now, because that'll give us a sense of how many people switched over to watch the show on Max. You know, if they're averaging 580,000, let's say, and all of a sudden Dynamite this week does 420, right? It's a guesstimate, but you can kind of guess like how many people switched over to watch it on streaming. It's not going to be exact, but I've got something to say about their numbers when I get into the year in review later. One more thing on this. I did see part of the post-show scrum. I don't even know why I bothered, but I watched part of it, and I saw that one guy, Corey Lieb, from the Wrestling Observer. Of course, it came from the Observer. Asking Tony Khan about all of the online negativity around AEW. And he's blathering on about how it's all just for money. All of this negativity, all of it is done strictly for monetary reasons. And it's done just to try to bring down AEW. They're trying to kill AEW, basically. Even though he says, well, you guys just got this great new television deal. It's all about trying to bring you guys down. And he says it's bad faith. It's all bad faith criticism. And it's really tough as an AEW fan. He says it makes it really tough for him to be a fan. I swear this was a real question. I'm not making this up. It took him 6 years to ask it, but I'm listening to this guy. This is supposed to be a media scrum. One of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen at one of these things. And don't ever let them convince you that it's a real media scrum when these are the types of questions that they get asked. And the WWE ones aren't much better, by the way. But all of that just to ask Tony what his plan is to combat all of the negativity in 2025. Tony looked like he went through about 15 different emotions on his face as he sat there listening to this. And then finally he responds by talking about last year's attendance numbers for Wembley Stadium and how people tried to claim the real number was 73,000, but it was really 81,000. You can't make this stuff up. The payoff to that question was not worth the long journey that it took to get there.